Good evening. How are you all tonight? You're talkative.
Must be pretty good.
Yeah, they've got a lot of ideas to exchange. Thank you all for coming tonight. This program was created a year ago, actually, for the Hart County Historical Society, who requested it. And I thought that was kind of interesting that they wanted a program about Bearwallow that's in Barren County, in Hart County, but Hart County does extend, or Bearwallow does extend into Hart County. And it is kind of an interesting program and some things that a lot of people are not familiar with that have gone on there in ages past. For those of us who grew up there, and if you had either the fortune or misfortune of your address being Bearwallow Road, it drives telemarketers crazy. What? Do you have bears there? No, we don't. And so a lot of people wonder about that. This is kind of a humorous painting of the bear dance. I haven't heard of any bear dances that have taken place in the Bearwallow area. And would it be possible to turn that out? I think that might make it easier for them to see. This is a Bearwallow. And Webster's says that it's a declivity or a sink in the ground made or capable of having been made by bears. And it is a feature of wild habitat. A significant wallow means that a wallow is used by moose, elk, bison, mountain goats, and bears, used at least annually by multiple individuals of one or more species, as evidenced by the trails leading to the wallow, tracks there, lack of vegetation in the center of the wallow, and that sort of thing. No one knows exactly where the wallow is in Bearwallow. It has faded from view. But some of the important features of a wallow would be that it allows the animals to cover themselves in mud and dust to get relief from biting insects. It's a social function prior to mating season. Wallowing may also be important as a grooming behavior associated with molting and social behavior for group cohesion and playful behavior. And bears will roll in wallows to help cool themselves in the summer and as a method of marking their presence to other bears. So it all makes sense that you'd want a bear wallow in your neighborhood, perhaps. Cyrus Edwards, the great historian of that section of Barren, Hart, and Metcalfe counties, documented that Bearwallow has been on maps and in publications since 1783. That's one of the earliest place names in Barren County. Very few other places turn up prior to that. Obviously, that's before Kentucky statehood and certainly before Barren County was formed. He also tells us in his book, which you can buy out in the lobby, Debbie will be glad to take care of you there, that all signs of the lick disappeared but could be located as late as 1858 by a slight depression in the ground. Older people referred to it as a deer lick and a buffalo wallow, but no one ever saw a bear there. So great reason to call it Bearwallow. We think we're pretty special in Bearwallow, but maybe not as much as we hope. There's a Bearwallow in Barren County, there's a Bearwallow in Morgan County, and a Bearwallow in Washington County. And there's also Bearwallow Mountain, Bearwallow Ridge, Bearwallow Hollow, Bearwallow, Bearwallow Gap, and Bearwallow Trail, scattered mostly in the eastern section of Kentucky. And I'm sorry, I think our screen is not as wide as the program, but that's okay. Within the Barrens area, there are three major groves of trees. One is Blue Spring Grove, one is Bearwallow Grove, and the other is Rich Grove, which is present-day Goodnight. And that extends all the way to Beaver Creek, so it takes in the area of the Slash, if you're familiar with that, Pruitt's Knob, and Flint Knob. And on the 1793 map of Kentucky, just a year after statehood, Elihu Barker also documents the Barrens in this great map. You can see the Barrens prominently noted there. You see Blue Spring over slightly to the right, and then farther south the Great Barren River, Skaggs Creek, and Beaver Creek. A topographical map that's current. Of course, we have Cave City, Horse Cave with Vile Knob, Pine Knob, Wooten's Knob, and then we get to Bearwallow. Vaughn Knob is very noticeable, it's very prominent in the community. Shelton lives on the side of it, and it's got a lot of history associated with it as well. And the county line, which has a story that we're going to get to in just a moment, and a photographic image of that whole area. But one of the surprising things that I discovered several years ago was that we had two French naturalists come through Barren County, and specifically they came through Bearwallow, and they wrote about Bearwallow. The first was Andre Michaud, and Andre came to Kentucky between 1785 and 1796. His son, Francois Andre Michaud, came to the same exact area as his father in 1802, and then Constantine Rafinesque, who was from Constantinople, came in 1819, and these men sort of put Bearwallow on the map. It's sort of how we got to be known. In 1792, Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State, and of course they wanted to finance an expedition to locate the Northwest Passage. Andre Michaud was the head of that group. 1793, Michaud met with the French envoy, Edmond Charles Genet, and recruited to serve as his political agent in the West, meaning Kentucky and Tennessee, on behalf of France against Spain. President Washington canceled that expedition. So Andre Michaud was here in this country. He thought he was going on this big expedition, and instead he goes on his own expedition somewhat and is collecting samples of the flora all through Kentucky, including Barren County. And he was here for less than 190 days. He was the first trained botanist to visit Kentucky, and he carried letters of introduction with him from Thomas Jefferson, Governor Isaac Shelby, Benjamin Logan, George Nicholas, General George Rogers Clark, and others. And the primary purpose was as an agent for France, but that wasn't working out so well, so it became this botanical exploration. And we know that July 28th of 1795, he crossed into the Barrens, and he noted the abundance of black oaks, post oaks, walnuts, shagbark hickory, and sumac. This is a fascinating thing. The first quote-unquote white people who came to settle in this part of Kentucky came as early as 1790 or so, but 1795, Michaud noted in his journal that he encountered a woman and her young child living in a crude cabin near Bearwallow. And the woman's husband had gone to purchase land near the Ohio River. he was the only person she had seen in 13 months. That's pretty desolate, in my opinion anyway. He also noted that there were broken holes in the shape of a funnel, of varying widths and depths from 15 to 30 feet. Some of the cavities had about 6 feet from the bottom, small trickling streams of water, and some of us still are combating those funnel-shaped holes today. He also noted that there were no small brooks or creeks in the Barrens, and that he believed that the lack of water and trees suitable for building fences would cause the area to develop slowly, if at all. And as we all know, it turned out to be the prime land in Barren County. He noted that the Barrens were very thinly inhabited. And get this, on the road where the plantations are the most contiguous, there are only 18 plantations in a space of 70 miles. Again, pretty sparse. There are not a lot of folks here. He also wrote about subterraneous caverns in the Barrens, some of which were near the surface. A short time before I passed this way, one of them sunk in the road near Bearwallow under the feet of a traveler. He noted the danger of the area was heightened because inhabitants lived so remotely that other travelers might pass through once every 15 days. And in February of 1796, he describes the area as covered with grass and oaks. He observed that the Barrens were burned annually, and he also noted that plants in the Barrens were the same as the plants that he saw in Illinois. This is his son, Francois. He was kind of surprised when he arrived, said he didn't find it to be as unattractive as his father had led him to believe, that it was a beautiful meadow where grass was from 2 to 3 feet high, and amidst the pasture lands he discovered a great variety of plants. He collected 90 specimens while he was here in the Barrens, and noted that bordering the Barrens were filled with black oaks, post oaks, shagbark hickory, and a few sumac. Raffines came in 1819. He was also on an expedition. He was a professor at Transylvania and was having an affair with the school's president, and he got fired. Imagine that. But he was one of the most brilliant scientific minds of his day. And he was one of the first to begin toying with the idea of evolution, which is pretty amazing at that early date. When he left Transylvania, he put a curse on the school, and then it burned to the ground. So perhaps it worked, I don't know. Interestingly, in the Barrens, there is an amazing array of educational opportunities in this very rural area. At Bearwallow specifically was Mount Mary's Academy, and that was going on there in the 1850s up to the Civil War. Stephen Collier, who was not from here, and very much an abolitionist and Union sympathizer, was the teacher of that school, and he ended up having to close the school, and he moved it to Hall's Rich Grove, which is right across from the Dr. Weldon farm at Goodnight, about where they're redoing the gas equipment there right now. Rock Springs School was taught by Isham Hardy, who was a pioneer settler, and he opened a school originally 1810, but then he moved it closer to the current Rock Spring Baptist Church. His son James Green Hardy then took over the school. Hardy was elected Lieutenant Governor of Kentucky in addition to being a school teacher. And his wife, third wife, Lucretia Hardy, had been a well-known teacher, and so she took over the Hardy School when he died rather unexpectedly. That school later became Sunnyside School, school number 1 in Barren County. Jefferson Seminary, we would say today that was at Goodnight, or it's Gratterville. In the 19th century, they would have thought that it was at Bearwallow. But it was chartered in 1828, a brick schoolhouse taught by Bowling G. Douglas, who was a graduate of Center College. A well-educated gentleman coming here. And then Blue Springs Seminary was on the Ament Farm, known as the Horde Farm on the Heisville Park Road. In 1834, the seminary was given a charter by the General Assembly. Burwell Lawless conducted those classes. Finally, the Camden Seminary was closer to Heisville, and it was taught by Methodist minister Jesse P. Murrell. I will add that Jesse P. Murrell was an extremely influential teacher, and when he died, he was buried in a field outside of current-day Heisville. And people began to take care of his graves, and other people decided, well, we could be buried there too. And so it turns out that Jesse P. Murrell, and you can always find him because he has the only tall obelisk in Heisville Cemetery, he was the first person buried in what became Heisville Cemetery. And the Bearwallow Survey, as it was called in the 19th century, was acquired by B. Jackson, and I believe this is Burwell Jackson. And he was quite the land speculator. He claimed and got possession of thousands upon thousands of acres in south central Kentucky. In 1829, I forgot that he built a double-room, two-story log home with stone chimneys, and he kept a tavern. So that's tavern number one that was at Bearwallow. In 1829, those lands passed to Robert Ferguson, who was the local justice of the peace. Soon after, Pascal Kirtley was constructed to build a large brick house on the main road through Bearwallow. The bricks for the house were burned on the property. The clay pit became the cellar for the property. And then we have some issues with what's going to happen with this. This is that brick structure. This photo made soon after the turn of the century. Those are some members of the Smith family at Bearwallow. This structure burned in 1914. But here's the problem. He was the justice of the peace. And that was an office that you just continued to stay in until you were replaced. And every 2 years, the justice of the peace with seniority got to be the sheriff for 2 years. That was a profitable position because the sheriff got a slight cut out of all the monies that he was collecting on behalf of the county government. The problem was he was ready to move into his new house, and someone pointed out that it was in Hart County. So if he moved in, he would have had to forfeit being the justice of the peace, and he wouldn't get to be sheriff. And incidentally, you could sell your sheriffship for $1,000 or a couple of $1,000s to some enterprising person who wanted it, so you weren't really having to do a whole lot. You were just passing that on, and you were getting a nice sum of money per year. So the solution was, in the 43rd General Assembly, passed by James T. Moorhead, who was governor and lieutenant and acting governor. And I'll mention here, this is significant because his predecessor died in office, and he fought to become governor. The legislature didn't want him to be governor. They said the people didn't elect him. He was the second vote getter, and he was just the lieutenant governor, but he had no authority. And so he went through the rest of his predecessor's term. He called himself the lieutenant governor. The legislature called him the acting governor. They did not want him to have that full title. But what happened was that the line originally run between the counties of Barren and Hart be established, except so much of it as includes the dwelling house of Robert Ferguson in the county of Hart, that the dwelling house of Robert Ferguson be, and the same is hereby declared to be in the county of Barren. So they moved the county line just by that one house and the front yard of it into Barren County, and he got to hold his offices, and Barren County got a little land. At this tavern, Ferguson built a structure in the back. He later had a two-story frame structure at the side with a porch, and that contained the rooms at the tavern. There was a common entrance for ordinary folk on that porch, but ladies and men of quality or distinction entered through the brick front. It had a kitchen that included stoves, ranges, an oven in the yard for baking. They used local produce, meats that were raised and available right there in the community. So it was probably a popular thing for local citizens to make a little money selling meat and produce. And to the southwest, there were covered stables, cribs, rooms for wagons and stagecoach hands, a wagon and stage yard, and sheds for your stock if you were traveling through. Bearwallow had 8 stagecoaches a day that came through, 4 each way. Additional special stages came through the village, and about half of them were taking their meals at the Bearwallow Tavern. This is a mock-up of what Cyrus Edwards described as the sign that hung on a pole in front of that brick house on the highway. The silhouette of a bear, the word wallow underneath it, and the proprietor's name. He also documented that a storm came through in 1858 and blew down the pole, and it was never put back up. So that was the end of the Bearwallow sign. We had a lot of famous people who came through Bearwallow at various times. Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, was touring America thanks to the promotion of Phineas T. Barnum. And in late March or early April of 1851, she stopped in Bearwallow, Kentucky, and the stile block that she stepped out of her stagecoach on is still there today, and that's it. That picture's just a couple of years old, but I don't know if she spent the night there or just rested and perhaps took a meal there. A lot of other pretty neat and rather influential people came through Bearwallow during this sort of heyday of the 1850s. Peter Cooper, who designed and built the first locomotive, the Tom Thumb. William Yancey, politician from Alabama. Tom Corwin became the governor of Ohio, the secretary of the Treasury, minister to Mexico. James Guthrie, another U.S. senator from Kentucky, he became the secretary of the Treasury. He was also the president of the L&N Railroad. Isham Green Harris, who was the 16th governor of Tennessee and a U.S. senator. John Cabell Breckinridge from Kentucky, who was vice president of the United States and later the Confederate Secretary of War. Thomas Marshall, another representative. Henry Clay's son, James B. Clay, who was also ambassador to Portugal, visited Bearwallow Tavern. Beverly Clark, and he was the opponent of Moorhead for governor, but minister to Guatemala. It's amazing how Kentuckians got these positions to all of these exotic countries in that time period. Beriah Magoffin, who was our Civil War era governor. John J. Crittenden, who was U.S. Senator, U.S. Attorney General. Cassius Clay was there. Presbyterian minister by the name of Stuart Robinson. Joseph Rogers Underwood, who has Barren County ties, but he lived over in Warren County and built Ironwood Farm. He married the daughter of the mayor of Washington, D.C., and She was running the farm. He was in Washington going to all these fine homes. Their letters are documented. They're at the Kentucky building at Western. And he's writing to her all of these features that he sees in these fine homes in Washington, D.C. She's having them built into their home, Ironwood, out on the Barren River outside of Bowling Green. They also were members of the colonization movement. They freed their slaves. Elizabeth taught them all to read and write and prepared them to go back to Africa. And their letters still exist, and they're also at Western. Very interesting. And P.T. Barnum came through. He may have been with Jenny Lind when she was there. It's hard to see, but this is the 1879 Beers and Lanigan map of Barren County, and it shows all kinds of places, not just towns, but it shows the property owners' names on or near their property. And it has some insets of Glasgow and Cave City, and I believe Heisville. On there are reproductions of these that are here available in the gift shop, but they're fascinating. Here's the section of Bearwallow, and see, this is the county line, and today this has been straightened out to be 31. Shelton's living right up here, where Thurman was living. The Wilsons lived over on the Heisville-Bearwallow Road. John Moss Thompson was over there. This is my great-great-grandmother. All of these different people, James Hare, T.L. Anderson owned the tavern for a short period of time. W.H. Hare owned the tavern for quite a while, and all kinds of interesting people here. Crossroads would be what is now Highway 70 at Griderville, which didn't exist earlier. Bearwallow shows up as one of the towns in Barren County in the 1881 Gazetteer. Tells us that it was organized in 1875. It has a post office. It's a small village in Barren County, 12 miles north of Glasgow. The county seat, 4 miles southeast of Horse Cave. Shipping point is the L&N Railroad at Horse Cave. 85 miles from Louisville, a church, a union school, a steam grist mill, sustained by 112 inhabitants. I think it's been a while since there have been 112 people living in Bearwallow. But you can see that this was at the time Anderson owned the tavern. A.W. Barron was the county clerk. Mr. Eubank, with a funny spelling of his last name, was the blacksmith. G.S. Green was a lawyer. Joseph Martin, a carpenter. J.W. Martin had a drugstore and sold groceries. Mr. Setter, and I suspect that's really Settle, was a wagon maker. W.H. Willis, a shoemaker. Dr. C.R. Wilson, and remember that name, it's going to come up in just a minute. He was a tobacco dealer, and Josiah Wilson was a liquor dealer and had a flour mill. One thing I will want to say is Ferguson operated the tavern until the early 1840s, and he sold it to a gentleman who very quickly went bankrupt, and there was litigation involved, and so there was an overseer to operate the tavern while that was being litigated. It ended up being the property of Claiborne Harlow and his brother John, and if I'm right, Claiborne is your ancestor through Jane, and they operated it until about 1847, and at that time the tavern was sold to William Hare, who was from Pennsylvania, and according to Cyrus Edwards and all other sources, that was really the heyday of the tavern and the village of Bearwallow from about 1847 until the Civil War broke out. The Gazetteer in 1883, a few things have changed. Obviously, the location hasn't. I am interested to know that the land commands from 25 to 50 bucks an acre. 1883, you'll see names that are still in that general vicinity of Barren and Southern Hart County. This is the mysterious disappearing historical marker. It's up for a while, and then it comes down, and it's down now. I'm not sure where it is. I hope it's in somebody's barn for safekeeping, but it's moved around quite a bit over the last 20 years or so. Hopefully one day it will be back on display. And of course we had churches in Bearwallow, but they're not actually in the village of Bearwallow necessarily. The Bearwallow Church of Christ was an African-American, Baptist church, excuse me, African-American church, and it's actually well into Hart County, closer to, you know. The Bearwallow Church of Christ is near what we call the wigwams out in the neighborhood. And then we get to this book. You remember I mentioned C.R. Wilson, and he was a dentist after he left here, got out of tobacco dealing, and resided in Louisville. And in, I believe, 1903, he penned a novel called Bearwallow Bells. As I understand it, some of the stories are true that are in it. The people in it existed, but their names are all switched around for the most part. There are interesting twists on the names. There are people's names who are spelled backwards as the first name. Lots of interesting characters. But it tells us a whole lot about who was in Bearwallow and some of the things that were taking place there that we don't know about elsewhere. He describes Bearwallow at that time as having a hotel, a church/school, and a store. He reveals to us that Billy Hare was the operator of the Bearwallow Tavern. He came from Pennsylvania. William Martin Wilson, who happened to be C.R. Wilson's father, was a farm owner. That farm would be on what's Heistville-Bearwallow Road, known as the Mauser Farm in most of the 20th century. Washington Slimmons was a real person who lived in Wisdom in Metcalfe County. Then he has some really over-the-top characters that were apparently based on real people in the community, the most colorful being Aunt Melindy Pentecost, who was from Goosehorn, which was the original name of Heistville. There's also John Buckles, who was the wagon driver, and he won a prize as being the ugliest man on earth in Bearwallow. His cousin was named Pouncey Pillsbury, and he was from Lick the Skillet. There were 3 local slaveholders singled out, and these people all lived. They were real. First is Cyrus Hutcherson, and he was actually closer to the Park community, and he's buried there. James J. Birch lived at the crossroads of Highway 70 and Old Lexington Road, and he is buried there, and William Martin Wilson. Then he mentions 3 specific Unionists in the area. One was Dr. Tyler, and he was actually Dr. S.P. Taylor, and his farm is just past Bearwallow on what was the Green Farm, and one of his descendants, Ruth Becker, came from Louisville and restored that family home years ago and lived there for quite a while. But he figures into this story greatly. There was Anselm Watson in the book. In real life, it's Anselm Watkins, and he lived on what those who are from the area would know as the Wathel Farm on Highway 31E, and John Harlow. Then we have interesting characters like Nellie Terrell, who was a student at Mount Mary's Academy. She was from Selma, Alabama, and her greatly upsetting thing was that she spat up on and stamped her foot on the shadow of the American flag at the store. And that figures into this whole story. She's engaged to Dr. Taylor's son. Sam Taylor, the son, engaged to Nellie. Nellie has a brother named Alexander Terrell, and they have a cousin named Gladys. Gerald Davis, who's a friend of the Terrells. Then we have a black servant named Jordan, an Irishman by the name of Tim Finnegan. He really did exist, and he was described as low, heavy set with red hair. He lived at Dr. Taylor's property and was the foreman for his farm, and there was a duello in this novel, and he was the second for one of the folks, and he refused to select guns, knives, or swords for the battle. He wanted to use fists only. Sue Tyler, known as an Angel of Mercy, was actually the daughter of Dr. Taylor. That duel took place north of Dr. Taylor's home in real life. It was partially hidden by undergrowth, and guess what else was at that area? That apparently had been created and sustained by young boys of the neighborhood, but a merry-go-round. Interesting. There's also Dr. William E. Garnett, who really did exist. His wife was Lucinda Wilson, who was William Martin Wilson's daughter, C.R. Wilson's sister, and Sam Tyler and Alexander Terrell were the two people having the duel. And according to the description in the book, they stripped to their waist. They were to fight 2 minutes, rest 1 minute, and then continue fighting. And the description in the novel is kind of interesting. In the first round, it said they fought like demons. By the third round, they fought like butchers. The fourth round, they fought like a cyclone. And the sixth round, they fought like wildcats. And Sam Tyler prevailed, and he's about to go off to school, so he does get healed and comes back. There's also a Colonel Tilton, who is from the north. There was a Brooken Wilson, who was a slave who belonged to William Martin Wilson. And in this, he is the person they call for all the social entertainment at the tavern. He comes with his fiddle and his banjo, and he performs for the white spectators, knowing that they're going to give him a tip. Colonel W.E. Woodson was from South Carolina and had Kentucky ties. And others include Bill Pentecost, Aunt Melindy's husband, Eve Halsey of Chicken Bristle, Tim Finnegan of Bearwallow. All of this group is doing all sorts of things in this novel. The Civil War breaks out, and the novel moves to the battlefield. The war is over, and there's going to be a reconciliation. The hero/heroine of the book, Sandy knows this. Has anybody read this book? You can get a reprint of it. The star person is Nello, N-E-L-L-O, Terry, who actually is a woman disguised as a man, and she fought through the Civil War and just happened to meet Jefferson Davis while she was fighting in the war and made it back to Bearwallow. And she's the bride at the wedding at the end of the book, which the wedding was performed by Reverend Edward H. Smith. He really was the preacher of the Christian church in Bearwallow and later at Heisville. It's a difficult book to read, but you can get a reprint of it, Amazon. It has extreme flowery prose, and I read it and think, well, all of these 12 pages I just read could have been summed up in 2 paragraphs. But it's interesting, and it's very colorful. Most 21st century people would say it's very racist in areas, so beware of that. But it is available, and every now and then you can find one of the original Bearwallow Bells books. And he has a little bit of verse at the beginning of his book. Should you decide Bearwallow Bells to read, and glean one word by which a heartache's freed, or cause one smile to wreathe your lips again, I'd feel I'd not written it in vain. It was not a bestseller, as you might imagine. But it is a part of the story of Bearwallow. And I'll get back over here to the map of Bearwallow if any of you want to see that. Anyone have questions?
When was that book published?
1903. But I think a lot of fascinating things that you weren't expecting, like French naturalists and botanists coming to collect specimens in Bearwallow, and a whole lot of famous people traveling through over the years that we wouldn't have thought of. Yes, John.
Girls' school you mentioned.
Yes.
St. Mary's?
Mount Mary's.
Mount Mary's. Where was it located?
I do not know, but I'm thinking it was right in the little village. And if you look at the description of Bearwallow in Cyrus Edwards' book, and you compare it to that map, you can kind of figure out where he's talking about in the book. Because, he's prone to say things like where John Smith used to live. We don't know that, but the map might help us. And so you can kind of figure out some of those locations. The tavern was on what's now the cutoff road that goes to Cave City. Unfortunately is gone. It would be a neat place to have in the community if it still existed.
Why do you think so many educational facilities were in that one area?
I'm really not sure, but it's very interesting because this was a pretty rural area. And interestingly, only a couple of those were actually common schools, public schools sponsored by the state. The others were private academies, so families were paying for their children to go there and be educated, which I think says a lot about those people and their backgrounds that we might not know, but a little research would help us to learn about. Carl.
Just in addition, something I discovered a few years ago that I didn't really know. You mentioned Ferguson's and the tavern and the rooms that were rented there, but there was an entire network of inns and taverns as you would go along. And strangely to me, in a way, they were located very close to each other. In Barren County, for example, when you come in at Bearwallow there, and you had Ferguson's, you come up to the road there, just at Crossroads, there's another inn and tavern. Then you get to Pruitt's Knob down below Cave City, and Elisha Dickey had a tavern there in the late 1840s and early 50s. And then, of course, you make your way to Park City, which was not Park City at that time, but Bell's Tavern was there. So you're really looking at a network of those inns and taverns where they're really maybe only 5 or 6 miles apart.
Exactly.
And if you read anything about any of them, you know, there's not a one of them that Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay didn't stay
Yes.
there. It's pretty fascinating.
They got around.
I think a few years ago, I was working with Norman Warnell. Yeah, they had that about Jenny Lynn singing in all those places. And so I took her diaries and everybody's story. And she did not sing it. She did.
Exactly.
She sang in a lot of those places, but she did not stay there. And I remember thinking, well, if she's going to go, I can't remember how it was, but she had to go way out of her way to go to that tavern, then come back up to Mumfordville.
Yes.
But it's very possible.
It is possible, and I've done that same thing. I've compared her diary of where she was to all of these claims.
Bowling Green at the Gossip House, she spent the night there. Couldn't have possibly.
So I think maybe if the stage slowed down enough for her to step off, that was considered a visit. One of the other things that I find interesting that I did not mention is Cyrus Edwards makes a great point of the fact that the Bearwallow Tavern was not a drinking establishment like most taverns, that it wasn't generally served there, but you could buy it there, but you weren't going to be served alcoholic beverages at the tavern as compared to Bell's Tavern, where peach and honey was the signature drink and has been written about, and all sorts of things over the years. And sadly, with the tavern, the later owners tore down part of those additions. The stables and sheds and quarters for servants and stagecoach drivers all burned early 20th century, so they're all gone. And of course, the railroad making that disastrous move to the west, to Horse Cave and Cave City, ruined the little town.
In my hometown.
And well, there were two routes proposed for the L&N. The west route was going to take you, say, from Elizabethtown, Mumfordville, Horse Cave, Cave City, that was just a flag stop mostly at that time, onto Bowling Green. The east route would have taken the route from Louisville to Greensburg, and from Greensburg it would have come through Bearwallow, then to Glasgow, then to Scottsville, to Lebanon, Tennessee, and to Nashville. And money talks. And Bowling Green had a big influence on luring the railroad away from Barren County as much as they could. And
Bardstown
so
let the deal down too. Glasgow did their part.
they tried, yes.
They tried to, but Bardstown voted against the tax that would have funded their part of the line, and the line was chosen about where the most money was.
So we missed out.
Thank you.
Although I'm not sure Bearwallowites today would really want the train coming through the middle of the town, if you will. Yes, I'm sorry.
Where was the actual village located? Is it near where these roads converge to?
Yes, yes. Any other questions?
Those stepping stone things for the coach, that's down there at Danny Vincent's place.
Mm-hmm.
And is that where that's where the tavern was?
That is very close to the location of the tavern. And the best I can tell from Cyrus Edwards' description is that the original house Burwell Jackson had there was probably on your property, on the top of the ridge. And Then it's mentioned that there's another house down lower to the road that was then the Louisville and Nashville, and I think you can see kind of a layout of the village when you start trying to pinpoint those places.
Is this the same Burwell Jackson that wound up in Warren County?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he ended up there. He had lots of land claims. If you just do a search for his land claims, you know, it screens full on ancestry and so forth. He had a lot of land that he was speculating with and dividing up and reselling and so forth. Any other questions? We'll leave that up if you want to look at that closer. It's kind of fun to see.
Sam, when did they, like Louisville and Nashville Pike became, what, 31E? When did they start numbering those roads instead of naming them?
I don't know. I would have to do some research on
Did
it.
that highway department at the time? Or?
Probably the 1920s, as roads were being improved and people were able to travel more when they had automobiles, and the creation of the Dixie Highway over on the Cave City side affected Bearwallow a lot too, because it took some of that traffic that was coming from the north to the south and vice versa over to a closer route that was closer to Mammoth Cave.
Is this part of the Cumberland Trace? Most of these buffalo licks, the traces where the buffalo were, the licks are where they stopped and not the wallows were formed.
Mm-hmm.
And of course people, I think the problem I've seen tracing the Cumberland Trace is, it's just like a lot of dairy cattle coming to the barn. They have all these little trails.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not one big trail.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of little trails.
Mm-hmm.
The birds all come back together.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Thank you all.
Thank you.
If you're on the board, if you can help me put the chairs away, that would be great.